Hi there. In this video, I'm going to give you an insight into how you can make sure your students are as successful as possible in answering 5-mark questions for any student studying AQA GCSE religious studies, with a focus on Christianity in this instance, although the approach we look at today will work for whichever religion your students have studied. Students are able to take a similar approach in answering these types of Paper 1 5-mark questions as they would do for the 4-mark questions on this paper. But there is a little extra work involved here to make sure students are referring to scripture or another source of religious authority, such as a religious leader, to get that final 5th mark. You can see on the screen an example of how the question will likely be laid out on both the question paper and the answer booklet, and indeed in the mark scheme. This question is the 4th question in the section that students will be answering, and students should aim to write a short paragraph of around 3 sentences in answer to this question, so that they are leaving themselves enough time to fully answer the 12-mark question which follows this one in every section of the exam. The question we're having a look at here revolves around the concept of sin, and if students can't decode the word sin, then they'd struggle to answer this question. So as ever, make sure you're devoting curriculum time in the run-up to the exam to helping students learn and retain key religious terminology so that they don't get stuck on questions like this in their exam. The mark scheme goes into great detail about all sorts of things students could write, and any new teacher, when faced with the mark scheme here, might wonder just how much a student needs to write in order to get the marks. But the mark scheme is clear. To get 5 out of 5 on this question, students must give 2 explanations which are developed and also make a relevant, meaningful reference to scripture in their answer. On the screen now, you can see more suggestions from the exam board about what students could include, but there is absolutely no need for students to write this much, as you'll see shortly. So any teachers who might be anxious that their students might have to write more than 1 paragraph in answer to this question can relax, as it really isn't necessary. These are simply suggestions about what your students could write, something we call indicative content. Your student could, as it says at the top of the screen, write something in relation to sin that is valid but not listed in the indicative content, and still get the marks as long as their answer is logically sound. The mark scheme will also give suggested references to scripture or quotes from religious leaders. And again, students only need to include 1 reference to a religious teaching, and quite often they will get the marks without directly quoting from scripture, as close paraphrasing and mentioning the source, which in this case is the Bible, will be enough to earn them that 5th mark on this question. It is good practice, though, for students to learn quotes, as quite often they can be used in a variety of contexts. Once again, here are some more suggestions for quotes that could be included in the answer to this question. Although the Bible is full of many more quotes regarding sin that would be more than creditable here, so once again, don't worry if the quotes your students include aren't listed here. So long as they are relevant, they'll be credited by the examiner. Another thing I'd like to point out here is that although the mark scheme gives exact Bible passage references, this level of detail, while impressive, is not required by the examiner for them to get the mark. Simply saying your quote can be found in the New Testament or even the Bible is sufficient enough. So how would I go about telling students to answer this question? Well, your student wants to signpost to the examiner that they know what is required to get the marks. As such, I'd start off with the sentence starters on the screen, which prompt the student to give 2 explanations and a reference to religious authority. Let's first of all have a look at an answer that would get 3 out of 5, and then we'll look at one that gets 5 out of 5, so that you can be confident in explaining to your students the difference between a simple answer and a developed one. So the following answer would likely be credited with 3 out of 5 in the exam. What you have here is 2 simple explanations for Christian teachings about sin, plus a relevant quote from the New Testament. We wouldn't, however, really consider these developed explanations, though. Our students would need to add a bit of depth to each of those first 2 sentences to get the extra marks. So let's have a look at what that would look like. You can see that to develop those explanations in the first 2 sentences, extra explanation, development, context, call it what you like, needs adding in order to be credited with the extra marks. You can see that the 3rd sentence has not changed though, since that was already good enough standing alone to get the 5th mark. It's also entirely possible for students to include the reference to scripture or other religious authority as part of the first two sentences on the screen. If they can do that, and if it's appropriate, it will always be credited if done right. Many teachers, though, prefer to get their students to separate the sentences out in order to flag to the examiner that the marks are easily awardable, which is very much the case here. And that's it for this video on 5-mark questions for Paper 1 of the AQA Religious Studies GCSE. I'm Andy from Propello, and if you'd like any more help with your religious studies teaching or resources, then please just visit us at propello.com/UK and sign up for a free account.